Good morning. I'm Paul Cappitelli. It's my pleasure to join all of you today at CFER's third annual conference. As a CFER advisor and a retired police officer myself, it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker. She's a highly respected expert on topics related to criminal justice and policing. Her perspective and acumen always bring reason and insight to complex contemporaneous discussions. As many of you know, Ms. Heather McDonald is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor of City Journal. She's a New York Times best-selling author. Ms. McDonald has written insightful books, including her latest, When Race Trumps Merit, and The Diversity Delusion, How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture, and my favorite, The War on Cops, and The Immigration Solution, A Better Plan Than Today's. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our featured guest speaker, Ms. Heather McDonald. Okay, our first question for you, Ms. McDonald. Can you please give us a synopsis of When Race Trumps Merit? Is it a sequel to The Diversity Delusion?
Well, first of all, just let me give my thanks for being invited to this fantastic conference. I hope that all of you did not need to travel far, because I hope you're local to Irvine in California, which I still think is the greatest state ever, and they're not going to get me out of here. I'm going to stay and fight. Unfortunately, I do have to live part of the time in New York City, but that's only because I don't want to swim outdoors in an Irvine winter. But otherwise, I'd be here all year round. So I hope you guys have the good fortune of living in this gorgeous environment as well. Yes, When Race Trumps Merit is a sequel to my work. I think it's sort of the culmination of it. And it argues that the concept of disparate impact is threatening our civilization. And let me explain to you what I mean by disparate impact. At present, we're living in a reality that says that any racial disparity in any institution is by definition the product of racism. Racism is the only allowable explanation, whether it's the underrepresentation of so-called underrepresented minorities, meaning predominantly blacks and to a lesser extent Hispanics in an institution, or the overrepresentation of blacks. So for example, if Google does not have 13% black tech engineers, computer scientists, AI researchers, 13% being the percentage of the black population nationwide, Google is by definition a racist institution that must, by definition, be discriminating against competitively qualified black engineers and computer scientists. On the other side of things, if blacks are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, which they are, they're about a third of the nation's prisoners, comprised of state and federal prisoners, even though, again, they're only 13% of the population. The only allowable explanation for that overrepresentation of blacks in the criminal justice system is racism. And if you've been following at all what's been going on in the criminal justice system recently, if you know about George Gascon in Los Angeles, the progressive Soros-founded district attorney, who upon taking office published a whole list of crimes that his office would no longer prosecute, including shoplifting, looting, resisting arrest, which, as Paul would understand, you say that you can attack a police officer or fail to follow his lawful authority with impunity, and you have ended civilization. You have declared law and order no longer matters. So Gascon said we're not going to prosecute a whole range of offenses. Alvin Bragg did the same thing. Believe it or not, sometimes Alvin Bragg doesn't prosecute. He does go after, very ancient alleged electoral violations and strange bookkeeping changes with a passion, But when it comes to keeping the subways safe, to keeping small property owners, such as we heard about before, safe in the security of their property, which is the obligation of government to do, Alvin Bragg said, I'm not prosecuting this. Kim Foxx in Chicago, same thing. Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, same thing. Pamela Price in Oakland, same thing. Why? Everything that is going on in the criminal justice system today is a product of the concept of disparate impact. Because if those law enforcement officers enforce the law in a colorblind, neutral, constitutional fashion, they will have a disparate impact on Black criminals. And it is a refusal to apply the law in a colorblind fashion that is leading to the epidemic of vagrancy, of looting, of violence, of robberies that we're seeing today. So my argument in the book is that we cannot allow the left to have the only allowable explanation for these real and tragic racial disparities. I propose a different explanation. In the case of the underrepresentation of Blacks in various meritocratic institutions, the reason is a very, very large academic skills gap. That should be the focus of our attention. When you have 66% of Black 12th graders not even possessing partial mastery of basic math skills, basic 12th grade math skills mean merely being able to do some arithmetic and read a linear graph. 66% of Black 12th graders cannot even do that. 50% of Black 12th graders do not have even partial mastery of the most basic reading skills. It is preposterous to say that the only possible explanation for the fact that this Alzheimer's research lab or this oncology research lab doesn't have 13% Black neurologists or Black oncologists. And yet, that is what the federal government says under Joe Biden, and sadly, under Donald Trump. He allowed his science agencies to continue with this destructive crusade for racial proportionality at all costs. The federal science agencies are allotting federal research grants on the basis of race, not on the basis of merit. China, meanwhile, is laughing all the way to the bank. We are tearing down gifted and talented programs. This organization has fought this for colorblind meritocratic admissions, whether it's Lowell High School in San Francisco or Thomas Jefferson in Virginia or Stuyvesant High School in New York City, has fought to be able to be judged on competence and accomplishment against an elite that says, if you are of the wrong color and ethnicity and nationality, you have to be 10 times better than anybody else to be even considered for admission. And it's not just the gifted and talented programs, it's of course medical schools, law schools, engineering schools. What's China doing? China is finding its best math talent and throwing everything it's got at them. It is trying to accelerate their math learning as fast as possible. Meanwhile, California is saying, no, no, no. You may be capable of learning algebra in the 9th grade, but you're going to have to hold off in the hope that if we defer algebra until the 11th grade, it will be a more diverse math classroom. We are putting a lid on our top talent in the name of diversity, while China is putting an engine underneath its top tech STEM talent in order to accelerate the tech arms race the weapons race, you name it, and it is winning. In the case of law enforcement and the disparate impact conceit there, here's what happens when you say we're not going to enforce the law because it has a disparate impact on Black criminals. I have spent decades going into inner city community police meetings, and I try to give voice to those good law-abiding people in those high crime communities, the women in their fabulous hats who stand up out of the blue, apropos of nothing in particular, and who say, thank God when we see the police, they are my friends. When you demonize the cops as racists, simply for trying to keep the peace and enforcing the law, the cops get the message. If it's racist to arrest somebody for shoplifting or looting, if it's racist to get out of your car at 2 a.m. when you see somebody standing on a known drug corner, hitching up his waistband as if he's as a gun, and ask that guy a few questions to make sure that he is not either engaged in a drug set or planning a drive-by shooting, if it's racist to make that stop because they are counting your stops and they are measuring that against a population benchmark, the cops stop doing that. They're getting a political message. Who can blame them? They're being told by the elites that you're racist for going into high crime neighborhoods and trying to protect the law. And guess what happens? The Black death rate goes through the roof. Black children are being gunned down in Chicago on a weekly basis. Somebody in Chicago is shot every 2 hours and 50 minutes. Somebody is murdered every 14 hours. Now, those shootings every 2 hours and 50 minutes, it's not as if they're happening all across Chicago. They are concentrated in an area that is maybe the size of Newport Beach and Laguna Beach combined. Imagine for a moment if in that little area of the California coast, somebody was being shot every 2 hours and 50 minutes. It's inconceivable. We turn our eyes away. Inner city Blacks are living in an alternative reality. There would be a revolution if there was that much crime happening in the white community. And the media don't give a damn. They only care about Black lives in the rare instance when a police shoots somebody, and that is very rare. Every year, about 8,000 to 10,000 Blacks are killed by homicide. That's more than all white and Hispanic homicide victims combined, even though Blacks are only 13% of the population. Dozens of Blacks are killed every single day in these insane drive-by shootings. A minute fraction of them are killed by the cops. The cops kill about 1,000 people a year, fatally shooting about 1,000 people a year. 50% of those are white, 225% are Blacks. So 250 Blacks shot a year by the police, the vast majority armed resisting arrest. Maybe 10 to 20 a year of so-called unarmed Blacks are killed by the cops. Those are the only Black victims the press will allow you to hear about. The rest, they don't give a damn about, and the other people who don't give a damn about those innocent Black bystanders are the activists. There has never been a Black Lives Matter activist who has shown up and protested the killing of a 3-month-old baby due to a drive-by shooting. It has happened not once. So, my argument, if we continue to be terrified to speak about the realities of the skills gap and the crime gap and accept the explanation that we are a systemically racist society, something that President Biden ran on in 2020, everybody purported to be so surprised. I thought this was a nice, mild-mannered, meek man. Where they got that idea, you guys were not paying attention. I'm sorry. He put us completely on notice, gave us notice. He would routinely, as a candidate, talk about the stain of white supremacy. He said that in his inauguration speech, and he has continued every moment he can have the opportunity to talk about Black parents being right to fear that their kids will be killed by a cop every time they walk outside. Preposterous, it's a lie. As long as the left dominates this and we cannot talk about the crime and skills gaps, everything is coming down. We are tearing down the criminal law. We are tearing down meritocratic standards. We are tearing down the expectation of excellence, and we are not doing the alleged beneficiaries of our lies any benefit. You are not helping people to say, okay, you don't have to live up to the same expectations of excellence as everybody else. We'll have a two-tiered system of accomplishment, one for whites and Asians and one for Blacks and Hispanics. That is condescending, and it is completely counterproductive. And in the case of crime, when you stop enforcing the law after the George Floyd race riots, the United States saw the largest homicide increase in its history, 29%, unprecedented. Thousands more Black lives were taken. Not a single one of those protested. We are not going to get our culture and our civilization back, and it's coming down in the arts as well, and I'll leave that to the side, unless we are willing to say, yes, we were a white supremacist society. We were. We violated our founding ideals every single day. White Americans were unbelievably indifferent to their own hypocrisy. They treated Blacks with gratuitous cruelty, humiliated Blacks that were trying to live up to bourgeois standards. It breaks my heart to see these pictures of Ella Fitzgerald and Duke Ellington dressed to the nines and still told they could not get hotel lodging. This lasted very long, but it is not our reality today. We are not a white supremacist country. The reality is Black privilege, not white privilege. All believe in white privilege. When I see a Black applicant put down on his college application that he's white because he thinks that would serve him good in getting admitted, any student that would do that is completely clueless about what's going on. But I can guarantee you that there's many a white male that hopes he could get away with putting himself down as Black, because he would. Because being Black today is the source of privilege. So we must stop apologizing for Western civilization. It gave the world science, progress, liberty, freedom. Stand up for the truth, because if we don't, everything that has been built up through hundreds of years of civilizational progress is coming down. So that's a not brief synopsis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So our next question, I think you touched on some of it. The question is, why does an emphasis on race and diversity hurt the very individuals proponents pledge to help, whether it is in education or regarding public safety? I think you talked a lot about public safety. Maybe for a moment you could talk a little more about the education part.
Yeah, again, it's what George Bush said, the soft bigotry of low expectations. It's very clear. I remember when the New York Times started timidly edging up in the 1990s, writing about racial preferences. And we were all supposed to, we're all living these amazing lies. We're living the lie that racial preferences don't exist. Every school says, racial preferences don't exist. We don't have double standards of admissions. At the same time, they say, if you ban racial preferences, we're not going to be able to attain diversity. So both can't be true. But I remember when there was little dribble and drabbles of evidence coming out, the Times interviewed some high school seniors, and they were perfectly aware of what's going on. They said, I don't need to study as hard. I'll get into college anyway. That's true. These high school seniors, they have to play this game that preferences don't exist. But everybody's checking each other's SAT scores. Everybody knows what's going on. And everybody knows that Blacks are admitted to college with SAT scores that would be automatically disqualifying if presented by whites and Asians. And so some students are going to strive anyway, but frankly, it's a perfectly understandable human reaction to work as hard as you need to get ahead and no more. You know, if you can party and still get into your chosen school, why not do it? So by sending the message that there are double standards of excellence and accomplishment, you are hurting the people you purport to help by not giving them the incentive to maximize their talents. And it frankly should just be seen as an insult. It's just not the case. At this point, there are vast cultural differences. If everybody acted like Asian parents, we'd all be better off. Asians are whooping everybody's ass, including Jews now. I mean, Asians are the new Jews. Jews are kind of wanted, you know, second effect, because they are fanatically obsessed about their children's academic performance. And I'm sorry, that is not the norm in most Black families. Very difficult to say, but it's not. I've been to inner city schools in New York City. The classroom is atrocious. Asian parents would never allow this. The kids have their backs to the teachers, their earbuds are in, they're walking around, and of course, if the teacher tries to discipline them, they'll be accused of racism because there's disparate rates of school discipline. Again, Disparate Impact said that's racist. The truth is, there's different types of student behavior. We're supposed to believe that teachers are racist. This is the most left-wing profession to our despair in the country. But the Obama administration was suing school district after school district because it was suspending Black students at a higher rate than anybody else. And the only allowable explanation for that was racism. The real reason is because Black children growing up now with the 70% out of wedlock birth rate are not getting socialized at home. And that lack of socialization is showing up in the classroom. Don't eviscerate discipline. Discipline is the last chance to try and inculcate self-control, deferred gratification, and adherence to bourgeois values. So by making excuses, by introducing double standards of behavior, double standards of accomplishment, you are guaranteeing ongoing skills gaps and behavior gaps in the future.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, our last question before we hopefully can get to a Q&A. And this is where everybody came today because you're going to tell us how we're going to fix it all. How can we as a naturally diverse and complex society overcome this illusion? What can be done?
Truth. Don't be frightened by being called a racist if it's not a justified accusation. Just once, if people were to be inoculated against the racism charge, everything would go away. It is the terror of being called a racist that is silencing people on college campuses. Be armed with the facts about the crime facts. I mean, Black children are shot at 100 times the rate of white juveniles. 100 times the rate. That should be the civil rights problem that the activists are concerned about. Who's shooting them? Not the police, not other whites, but other Blacks, juveniles. You cannot go after that violence without, again, having a disparate impact on Black criminals. But if you don't do that, Black victims are the ones who suffer. So it's easy for me to say, speak the truth, because I'm in a relatively insulated environment. I'm not in a university, and I have nothing but respect for those professors who have gone up against the massive left-wing silencing machine. Some have lost their jobs. in a most amazing circumstance. At Georgetown Law School, there were two law school clinic professors that taught negotiation. And they were having a private conversation over Zoom together. It was not public. And one of them said that she was very troubled and upset and depressed by the fact that in her class, the Black students were always at the bottom. And this was the result of mismatch, which Richard Sander, who comes after me today, will talk about, which is that in every professional school, whether it's medicine or law or engineering, because of racial preferences, Blacks are being catapulted above their current skill level to be in classes with students that are more advanced than them academically. That is cruel. It is unfair. If MIT admitted me because it wanted gender equity in its freshman class, and I had a 650 on my math SAT out of an 800-point math SAT score, and all my peers had 800s who were admitted not on gender grounds, but on excellence grounds, I would flounder. There is no way I could keep up in freshman calculus. We're putting Black students in that situation again and again and again. And so they do end up in law school. The statistics are dire. The Black students are at the bottom of their class. And what this teacher was observing about her experience is completely normal. Well, somehow this video got out, and the two professors were fired for speaking the truth to each other confidentially about the effect of this pernicious, pervasive regime of racial preferences. So it is very hard to speak the truth if you're in a leftist-controlled environment. But if you have any capacity to fight back against the racism narrative, you've got to do so. Because as I said at the beginning, as long as the racism remains the only allowable explanation for ongoing racial disparities, the left wins, and it is all coming down.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have some questions. Yes, sir. Do you want to? Let me give you the microphone that way. That way everybody can hear. Hold on. There you go. Thank you.
Mrs. McDonald, thank you for coming here to speak. I became aware of your work a while back, and one of the more evil things to come out of this new activist moment is that they tend to oversimplify the idea of race. Like, for example, what do you mean by Asian? Do you mean by Chinese, Japanese, Cambodian, or whatever? What do you mean by Black, Nigerian, Jamaican, what have you? Thomas Sowell makes it very, very clear that cultural impacts have a major impact on disparity, on the outcomes of the individual that come out of specific races. We see Nigerians, Jamaicans, South Asians who are Black who come to the United States, and they have a success rate, if I'm not mistaken, equal or superior to that of Asian communities. With the explosion of with the explosion of the knowledge that something's gone very, very wrong in these activist communities, is there now more of a discussion regarding cultural impact on outcomes? And well, I guess what I'm asking here, can you give me some optimism? Is the proper conversation being had more and more?
Sorry, I'm not an optimist by nature, so just take that into account, okay? I'm constitutionally a pessimist, so I find you optimists just crazy, and I've got a steak bet dinner riding on the outcome of this election, and you can guess which side I'm on. But I don't see it happening in the mainstream left at all, any discussion about culture. It's been going on in the right for a long time. I mean, I'm very bored at this point. If I don't bring up the out-of-wedlock birth rate problem, inevitably, if I'm talking to a conservative audience, somebody will point their hand and say, well, what about family breakdown? And my view is, what about it? You know, we've been saying this for the last 60 years since the Daniel Patrick Moynihan report back in the 1970s, commissioned by Richard Nixon to say, okay, give us a prognosis, what's going to happen with the civil rights movement. And Moynihan wrote an unbelievably prescient report that said, with a black illegitimacy rate currently at 23%, this was back in the 70s, the civil rights progress is going to come to a halt because there's too many black boys that are being raised without fathers, and they are not being socialized in the home. Well, Moynihan was right in pointing out the catastrophic effect of family breakdown. What he could not have foreseen was that today the black out of wedlock birth rate is 69, 70%. That is beyond repair. When you have the disappearance of the marriage norm to that extent, it affects not just any individual child raised without a father, it affects an entire culture and way to be a male. When boys grow up with the assumption that it is okay and acceptable in their community to serially impregnate females without taking responsibility for any of the children, they have failed to learn the most basic lesson of responsibility, and all others will be very difficult to be absorbed subsequently. So conservatives have been talking about culture, above all family breakdown, but also attentiveness to academic experience for a long time. Within academia, it's still completely taboo. I would say it's actually gotten worse. It's gotten worse. There used to be some recognition, even in the New York Times. Jason DeParle, a poverty reporter, would write about sort of single parents as such. And now, poverty is regarded as, or single mothers, to my despair, even Republican politicians treat single mothers as an ontological category now. It first happened with Marco Rubio. I remember maybe 8-10 years ago, he gave a speech and he was saying, what we're going to do for single mothers, as if this is kind of, as I say, an ontological voting block. No, wait a minute. Well, where's the fathers? This is that we have sort of thrown in the towel, and we now regard single mothers as kind of as natural and inevitable a category as working, cab drivers or Uber drivers, or if we even want to do the insanity of race, somebody black. That's a very discouraging moment. And for the left, it's just to understand the connection between poverty and single parenthood is taboo. But I'll tell you this, poverty in this country is a function exclusively of out-of-wedlock childbirth. That's it. If you could get rid of out-of-wedlock childbirth, you would basically take care of America's poverty problems. So I don't think in the Democratic Party and the left, I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you I see things getting better, but I don't, which just means that we have to keep speaking the truth all the more.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have time for more questions? One more question. We have time for one more question. Solved all the world's problems, everybody? Oh, yes, okay.
It's not as much a question, but a comment. For example, the left underscores hypocrisy when they don't call attention to racial proportionality in, for example, sports teams. Nobody is calling for 13% in football teams, in basketball teams. And nobody in the media is calling for adequate representation. There is. So they only do it when it serves them.
Yeah. I get that question every single time I speak, and I would love the left to answer. The closest I ever got to getting an answer from the left or getting them to respond, I was recently interviewed for this podcast called Freakonomics, and the topic they were pursuing was, should the NFL's Rooney Rule be applied to corporations? The Rooney Rule it's like now I think 2 decades old or so, maybe not that old, that says that every time the a team interviews for the head coach, they have to interview at least 2 black candidates on the assumption that these teams were discriminating against the most highly qualified coach, just be out of racism, that they're willing to like leave aside the next Super Bowl victory just so they don't have a black coach. So they've had this rule that you have to, and it's expanded, of course, you know, now you have to do the mandatory race-based interviews for a whole range of NFL positions. And so I was being interviewed by a left-wing reporter, and I said, you know, every time I speak on this subject, somebody will inevitably ask, but what about the diversity of sports? Why don't we care about, you know, what about there's no 5-foot-tall, skinny Asians on the playing basketball? Why shouldn't that matter? And what's your answer to that? And he had something that was so Baroque, and unfortunately, I don't have the sports knowledge to have understood it. He referred to somebody that I think was maybe one Asian basketball player in order to say, well, maybe there is a problem. But he basically ducked it. So I don't know. I mean, I saw you had a picture of the 100-meter dash at the Olympics, which I wasn't otherwise watching on TV, but there was a picture on the cover, and this was this guy, an American one, Keys, I think his name is, very beautiful man. But it was these gorgeous, lithe males going across the finish line, all black. And again, it's just the question. I don't know. I think what they would probably, if you put the gun to their head, I assume that they would answer would be, well, that is a meritocracy, but everything else is not. So they could say it was a meritocracy. Now that doesn't get to the diversity as an end in itself argument, you know, because we could still say, parroting the National Science Foundation who says, or the National Institutes of Health who says, preposterously, in case you haven't gotten the message yet, that the only good science is diverse science, and therefore we need to have racial preferences in allotting scientific grants. Well, if that's true, if you cannot do good science absent a proportional number of underrepresented minorities in your cancer research lab, why do we have good basketball teams without it? I don't know. But believe me, conservatives have been asking themselves that question for decades and never getting an answer from the other side. So I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Pause, please. All right. I think this concludes our session. I just want to make one personal note that's not on the comment sheet, but I wanted to say thank you very much for coming, and thank you for always being such a bold, insightful voice and for having the courage to say things that other people will not say. I can speak particularly on the law enforcement side because everything you've said has resonated for me for decades. And so thank you very much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.